had an opening in the roof and drops him in. We see that Daniel's life showed complete trust. There was no fight. There was just honoring God. Do you remember last week we kind of gave an age to how old we think Daniel was with the handwriting on the wall? Does anyone remember how old he is? In his 80s, that's right. Have you ever thought about that before with Daniel and the Lion's Den story? Being in Sunday school and you think, oh, here's this teenage boy, Daniel, right? We kind of lump together all chapters 1 through 6, and we think that the same teenage boys that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were is the same age that Daniel is in chapter 6. He's 80 years old. He's in his 80s. And this is not the time where people live to be 900 years old. 80 is an old man. Sorry if you're 80. I don't mean any offense. But it is true. 80 is not a teenager. We can all agree on that. So here's Daniel in his 80s, thrown into a den of lions, verse 16. And remember what we already know about him. He was faithful. He was faultless. He was honorable. He was a great ruler in the kingdom. He served God genuinely. But yet here's this 80-year-old guy who really is pretty blameless, and he's a threat to the kingdom, so we throw him in a den of lions. You can see how this bad decision from King Darius is compounding. The danger of serving ourselves and how quickly it can go from this little ego boost of, oh, king, live forever. Hey, that feels good. To now, all of a sudden, I am murdering violently a pretty innocent 80-year-old guy who has done nothing but help our kingdom. Daniel in verse 16 is thrown into the den of lions by a king with no backbone. And Darius is distressed. He doesn't want to follow through with it, but he does it anyway. And you know what he does? Verse 16, he wipes his hands of the outcome. He has to somehow deal with this distress that he has, and he will not decide to humble himself and change his mind. And so how is he going to deal with it? He's going to wipe his hands with it. Verse 16 says, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. So again, we see the life of Daniel was a testimony, because the king even says, this God that you serve continually. What a powerful testimony Daniel's life was, that even the king would say, yeah, you're faithful to this God. You've never abandoned this God. So you know what? In order to wipe my hands of it, that God should save you. There, now I'm done. I've said that if anyone's going to save you, it's going to be God, and now I can rest at ease a little bit more. That's how he tries to deal with this distress. But there's this disconnect in Darius, because he thinks it's going to bring some relief, and it doesn't. He can't sleep. He actually goes to sleep. It's a rough night, and he rushes first thing in the morning back to the lion's den to see, is there any way that Daniel is alive? Is there any way that this self-serving king can have all of the things that he wanted to have? He still wanted his friend alive, but he wasn't strong enough to do it himself. And at the end of the day, we see that the king gets to both save face, because he didn't have to go back on his word, and Daniel lives. We see in verse 23 that the king is exceedingly glad. Of course he was glad, because he got everything he wanted. He was able to stand strong in front of these people. His friend lived. He got it all at the end of the day. He was exceedingly glad. But what we see is that Daniel's life showed complete trust in two things. One, in God's power. Because you know what happened when Darius came back the next morning and he checked the lion's den? Of course you know what happened. Daniel was alive. And Daniel, from his own mouth, gives testimony to what happened. Look at verse 22. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. He trusted completely in God's power. And God is sovereign and powerful over everything he created, including a ferocious den of lions, and the power of God closed their mouths. We know nothing else about this. Was there a physical hand like that had written on the wall that clamped down and closed their mouths? I don't believe that God even needs to do that. I think that just in a moment, Those lions know the Creator. And they closed their mouths, and God did it. And Daniel testifies to it. My God sent his angel, and he closed the mouths of the lions. He had complete trust in God's power. He had complete trust in God's protection, because look at the rest of his testimony in verses 22 and 23. Not only did God send the angel to shut the mouths of the lions, but they have not harmed me at all. So not only did God close the mouths of the lions, but he kept the claws from damaging Daniel at all. In fact, you could even go so far as to say that God not only protected him from the lions, but he protected him from the fall into the lion's den. Because what they suspect is that it is like a mound, and there's a den that's there, and you drop someone in from the top. And it's not going to be shallow enough that a lion could climb out the top. It's going to be deep enough that those lions are not getting anywhere near the person on the outside. So Daniel fell into the lion's den. A free fall. No one was catching him. And it tells us that there was no harm of any kind found on Daniel. God protected him in every aspect of those words. He protected him completely because Daniel had complete trust in God's power and in God's protection. It even tells us in verse 23 the reason why this protection happened. Because he had trusted in his God. Because he had trusted in his God. And Daniel even is able to proclaim, I was found blameless before him. What a powerful statement. The simplicity, even though this is so hard to live out situationally, the simplicity of Daniel's statement of saying, all I did is worship a God who is worthy. All I did is just pray to him 3 times a day like I've always done. All I did was recognize that this God is a powerful, mighty, caring, loving God, and I just want to worship him. I'm blameless before God. That's why I'm saved, and this is what Daniel says in verse 22. You see, the name Daniel means God is my judge. He left it all up to God. Whether he lives or dies by the mouth of a lion, God is his judge. He trusted God, no matter the outcome, and God protected him. This is a further testimony that the plans of God is what prevails, not the plans of man. And we see that in Proverbs 19. It says, it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. And do you know what happened to the people once they got Daniel out of the lion's den? Do you know what the king did? You see, it was the same punishment would be applied to someone who made a false accusation. And so the lion's den was opened for the accusers and their wives and kids. So Daniel comes out, and in the pit go the families and the men who accuse Daniel. The innocent are brought up out, and the guilty actually go down in for the punishment. But Daniel makes one more comment in verse 22. He says, before you, O king, I have done no harm. Not only was Daniel blameless in the sight of God, he was blameless in front of the king. I've done nothing to offend you. I've done nothing to fight against you. And we see this incredible picture of what genuine faith in God does to our actions. It softens us towards other people who might rebel against us, who might cast us blamelessly, we're blameless, cast us into a den of lions, put us in circumstances that we hate and that we should rear up against them and we should be frustrated with them and we should yell at them and we should get angry with them. But Daniel says, I'm just innocent before God and before you because I've done nothing. I don't want to do anything to hurt you. What genuine faith Daniel had. And I want you to recognize in verse 24 something, that when those men and those families were dropped down into that pit, it tells us that before they reached the bottom of the den, they were taken over with the lions. So in case you're sitting here thinking, well, Daniel really got lucky because he was dropped in at night and those lions were just sleeping. They didn't even know he was there. They were just sleeping, right? Well, first, we know that God closed the mouths of the lions, but we also know, based on verse 24, that before these people even hit the bottom, those lions were so ferocious, so hungry, so angry about their territory that they didn't even have to touch the ground before those lions took them. This was not some fluke. This was God himself providing protection to Daniel. You see, Daniel was innocent, and Darius makes those who were guilty suffer death because of it. I want you to think about the cross of Jesus Christ. Because the cross of Jesus Christ says this, that the innocent one goes, Jesus, and he's nailed to the cross for the guilty's sin. So that the guilty get to live. Jesus is innocent. And he went to the cross to die for us. Every one of us is guilty. And so here's Jesus saying, I love them. I will take all the sins of the world and nail them to the cross so that every guilty person for eternity can be saved.